During a review, I made an offhand comment that better hardware can objectively improve certain aspects of gameplay. This led to a flurry of responses telling me that this was a dumb take, that I didn't understand art, or that my pumpkin looked great, which it did. The amount of passion in the responses surprised me, since I thought the "are games art" debate had run its course and become passé years ago, which is always the best time to dive in. Welcome to Too Late Who Gives a Shit. After Dark. The debate about games being art existed long before Roger Ebert entered the fray, but no one had more impact, given that his opinions forced gamers into a defensive stance that they still haven't quite relaxed from. Ebert defined things in absolute terms. Films are art, games are not, and can never be. Gamers offered specific titles that they thought proved him wrong, but he was unimpressed and there was never any decisive knockout counter-argument. We all just collectively decided he should fuck off and then he passed, so I guess we won. But the spirit of his argument still lingers, with people occasionally hailing certain games as proof that this format truly is art. To no one in particular. I think the framing of the debate itself is flawed because you shouldn't define art in absolutist terms. Ebert presented it as a given that films are art, but are all of them art? Studios often make movies simply for the purpose of preventing rights from expiring or reverting back to creators, sometimes without the intent to ever even release them. A German tax loophole led to many low-quality video game movies being churned out back-to-back, allegedly as a scheme for investors to shelter millions from the government. Marvel movies are almost entirely planned in previs, before a script is even written.
The first visualizations of a Marvel film will often begin before the script's fully finished. The studio is known to use visualization to map out every single scene.
The director, normally the most powerful creative voice, is brought in just to connect predetermined dots.
So all they have to do is be like an avid viewer of their own film as it's coming together and to be making comments.
They are a series of focus-tested action scenes and big fan service moments decided by a boardroom and shot as economically as possible. Are all of these films art? I would say no. I think each piece of media should be evaluated on an individual basis and not receive automatic blanket officiations as art just for belonging to a format. But you might not agree. Maybe you think these films are art, but bad art. Or maybe you think it's completely subjective and up to the viewer. Maybe Roger Corman's Fantastic Four is someone's bestest double favorite movie, and who are we to tell them they're wrong? I swear to God I'm not looping this, it goes on this long. Okay, now I'm looping it. I was unfortunate enough to get a bachelor's in art, and I never received any authoritative definition in any of my courses. At best, there are a lot of carefully worded attempts at definitions. No one really knows what they're talking about. If they did, debates about what is or isn't art wouldn't constantly keep cropping up. Art can be a painting, an album, a movie, or a banana taped on a wall. Over the last few decades, artists moved away from traditional media formats to instead transform physical spaces, putting rivers indoors or icebergs on streets. How could you thread all of these things together with a single-sentence definition? In my opinion, the inability to precisely define art is part of the point. It can be a more fundamental and direct form of communication than language allows, expressing ideas or feelings that would be difficult or impossible with words alone. One of my favorite records is Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, an album so abstract it doesn't even have track titles, just images. Even if the best writer on earth were to perfectly describe the songs down to every last detail, it would be useless, because reading an essay would never make you feel the way listening to the music does. Written text could also hardly describe the feeling of looking at a Mark Rothko painting any more than it could describe the color blue itself. On the other hand, novels operate entirely using everyday language, but carefully controlled and shaped to transplant you into a different person's brain and to think their thoughts. Our own brains are expanded as a result. Reading fiction has been shown to increase empathy, though it didn't fucking work on them. Some art directly connects to current or past real-world events to satirize, condemn, or glorify them. Other art uses metaphor or fantasy to make its point. Sometimes art is how we process and add meaning to otherwise random tragedies.
As you say, sir, she's as steady as a rock.
The Titanic becomes a story of humanity's hubris or the evils of capitalism, instead of thousands of people freezing to death in the Atlantic because a boat hit some ice. My own futile attempt at a definition is that it's humans expressing something about the experience of being human to other humans in a way that transcends standard everyday language, like the human equivalent of coding close to the metal. Can video games be used to accomplish this? Absolutely. It's almost absurd to even ask. But do they? And with enough frequency that the format should generally be considered art. This has long been a popular example.
Trivial information is accumulating every second.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander. Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. It will only slow down social progress.
At the time Metal Gear Solid 2 released, the internet hadn't been ruined yet. Social media didn't exist. The web was full of goofy, pointless fun. Movies, the lofty, highbrow art form, almost exclusively delivered dumb visions about where the internet would take us. Computers would allow hackers to do anything, anywhere, at any time with a couple of keystrokes.
Thought I started a little fire.
We can get in and out of the FBI like it's the public library.
And yet this lowly video game predicted that the internet would isolate us, misinform us, and lead to rampant ignorant tribalism that would dissolve society. It suggested that elite AIs would take control to make sense of the chaos and filter out the noise.
You think you're qualified to decide what's necessary and not?
Absolutely. Who else could wade through the sea of garbage you people produce?
AI models are now replacing web searches. Instead of doing your own research, LLMs will scour the web and deliver their summary of the truth. A summary that can easily be skewed to suit even the most extreme agendas, as evidenced by the recent birth of Mecha Hitler. Now I know my bold anti-Mecha Hitler stance might ruffle a few feathers.
I mean, this guy was a real jerk.
But I don't consider this a partisan issue. No one should be comfortable with AI spoon-feeding them information curated by God knows who. This game captured the bewilderment and danger of the current moment decades in advance, prescient almost to the point of being chilling.
I secretly know that it's home, since you're... Hello again. Hello again.
I hear it's amazing when the famous purple stuffed worm in Flapjaw space.
My father...
With the tuning fork.
Just the person that you were... Hello?
I need scissors.
I'm sorry.
This one requires every kind of warning, but you can't talk about games as art without including it. When you meet Angela in Silent Hill 2, her behavior is erratic and defensive. She warns that the town is dangerous, but can't specify how.
It's kind of hard to explain.
James enters to find his repressed thoughts physically manifesting themselves. In particular, the desire he felt for other women while his wife lay dying in the hospital. Angela's memories manifest her father, in the form of a bed frame with two figures horribly fused together. If video games are just frivolous time wasters, why would anyone go this far? Even for a horror game, it would be disgusting to exploit this topic for mere entertainment, right? Spend any amount of time researching this game and you'll frequently see survivors of abuse praising its depiction of trauma as one of the most cathartic and realistic in any media. Some are even able to clock Angela as having complex PTSD from the very first scene. Psychologists have also praised the authenticity of the depictions.
She is really reactive. She can subtly shift states. And all of those are indications, right, of somebody who is in some state of disorganization in their own mind, oftentimes because they've experienced things that don't make sense, right, and have overwhelmed them.
Another of Ebert's misunderstandings was that games are all literal games. They present rules of play and conditions for victory, which art cannot. But Silent Hill 2 does not feel like a game. It may not even be fun. The player shambles through a nightmare without rules. It's experienced more than it is played. And even when you dig deeper to find the ultimate win condition, it still sounds a lot like art.
As a therapist that's shown clients how to cope with trauma, the first step is usually to try to confront it, because repressing it will always do more harm than good. Sometimes when we do something we feel guilty about, that guilt can turn into a punishing feeling, pushing us to give in to our conscience and make things right.
An interesting theme in Silent Hill 2 is the idea of there being another way, which is particularly interesting for a video game where the player is playing and has choice and there are multiple endings. Here's a game that is explicitly asking whether anything you're doing matters. And I think that's really what the game is about, is this tiny glimmer of hope that it's possible to escape the patterns that we get locked into when we go through trauma and tragedy.
This was recently turned into a movie. Finally, Silent Hill 2 can be real art. Except the film has been widely panned as artless and inept. It merged Angela and every other female character together because there wasn't much runtime, and fuck it. It currently sits at 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, likely to be remembered as a footnote below a far more respected work. Obviously, games can grapple with ideas that are as complex and lofty as any other art form, but they can present them with the unique advantage of interactivity. In the 90s, a Japanese artist made a game to simulate dreams and, to some extent, psychedelic drugs. Movies can show this, and countless trip scenes have been filmed over the years.
This is bad country.
But only a game can allow the effect to change your movement and decision-making.
This is cube country.
Horror is a completely different concept in games. Everything in a movie is predetermined, but a player is fully responsible for defending the protagonist and keeping them alive. There's a unique pressure to remain alert at all times and develop the skills to survive, and developers can exploit the habits and muscle memory you form in ways that aren't really possible in other media formats. PT specifically explored this by numbing you to the environment through repetition, only to spring threats from the places your brain had been conditioned to believe were safe. Games can place you within different characters for different narrative effects. The Last of Us makes you experience the apocalypse not through the main character Joel, but through his daughter, to enhance the feelings of fear and helplessness. When the game does switch to Joel, it's for you to experience a different kind of fear, not for your own survival, but for hers. The sequel forces you to play the second half as the antagonist, humanizing them in a way that eventually erodes the line between hero and villain. Movies can hop between perspectives like this too, and the HBO series is trying, God bless it, but the connection you feel is greater when you've been a character for hours on end. Games can also force your participation in atrocities and horrors, which is much different and much less comfortable than simply watching actors commit them. And when used well, this can be a powerful thing.
Are those civilians?
Ebert considered this interactive quality to be the major barrier to games being art. His definition required deliberate authorship over every facet of the experience. But that requirement seems like a bit of an arbitrary ass-pull when considering that installation art also allows viewers to author their own experience. When Olafur Eliasson put an artificial sun indoors, he was surprised to see visitors lying on the floor and sunbathing in its glow. This type of art very often invites viewers to react in their own unique ways.
I have a certain feeling of having given the vision of the exhibition to somebody else. So we don't take in the exhibition, I always say, we produce it by walking through it. That is to suggest the authorship of reality, if you want, lays within the beholder, within the user, within the museum visitor. One should trust the visitors to take the authorship to become creative.
There is an argument that the openness of games allows for rough spots that even the most obsessive developers can't possibly account for, like reaching for an item and watching the game shit itself because a tiny scooter is in the way. Or missing those highly polished, painstakingly captured dialogue scenes because you got slightly too far out of range while looking for screws. Screws that you use to upgrade your guns to blow people's heads off better. This is another problem with games being art. They're stupid. A wide range of interactive options is usually a good thing. Having the choice to avoid violence using stealth or other methods is great, especially when the game rewards you for the extra time and effort it can take. Metal Gear stands out for encouraging non-lethal methods and punishing trigger-happy players. But there are times when the narrative has to force actions that the player may not want to do, and I'll give you a spoiler warning for Snake Eater and The Last of Us now. Executing the boss is a great example of forced actions done well. The player probably doesn't want to do it, and Snake certainly doesn't, but that's why it's forced. You have to live his story. When you learn that she was innocent, you feel as betrayed as Snake, because it was you that pulled the trigger. The murder spree at the end of The Last of Us is another good example. Most players will be at least a little conflicted about dooming humanity, but Joel is not, and when made an accomplice to his violence, an odd feeling arises, like you've been forced out of his body. You're not in the driver's seat anymore, instead taking a front row seat to his carnage and by extension his emotional state. It's not about shooting or cover or gameplay mechanics. It's about this person's desperate refusal to experience loss again, and his terrifying indifference to the loss he's inflicting on everyone else in the process. Giving the player an option would have really watered the ending down. The question of whether Joel was justified is compelling enough that people still bring it up 12 years later. For example, I just did, just now. The sequel is unfortunately full of bad examples of this. The anti-revenge theme is such a dead horse by the end that any player will have gotten it hours earlier. The forced engagement in utterly stupid, pointless barbarism is obviously meant to showcase the folly of revenge, but the inability to make a choice, or even move due to collision and camera locks, can really lay bare the rigid programming and kill the immersion of the game. I would have found the ending far more compelling if the player could make the right choice straight away and affirm what they'd learned, rather than be dragged backwards in a groan-inducing narrative they were miles ahead of. Knowing when to give control and when to take it away is like an art form in itself. But like art in other media, I don't think a game has to have an explicit narrative to be art. On the surface, Super Metroid is a silly game about a space person lasering aliens. But once you get absorbed in its world, a feeling of isolation creeps in and colors the exploration with an unexpected range of emotions. I'm as attached to this experience as I am to any album or movie. Does that make it art? It's worth noting that very few game creators consider what they do to be art. Hideo Kojima, who took storytelling in games more seriously than almost anyone in the 90s, has said he was not trying to make art. Shigeru Miyamoto has also never considered games art. Does the creator's intent even matter if the game ends up being art to you? It's a giant mess to unravel, but at the very least, almost everyone seems to agree now that games are capable of being art. But video games depend on technology to an extent that no other media format does. They are entirely rendered on a system of chips and modules, components that advance more rapidly than the tech driving any other media type. One of the arguments I've seen is that because games are art, remaking one is tantamount to redoing a Renaissance painting with modern brushes. But it's a bad analogy because it completely ignores the technology component. Paint has not meaningfully advanced for centuries. If you've had the privilege of seeing a Renaissance painting in a museum, they tend to look surprisingly good, with more depth in person than you'd expect. Might some cracks have been repaired? Sure, but that's not remotely equivalent to a remake. You're not creating, just restoring something to its previous state.
The conservator must limit any pigment that they're applying to just those areas of damage or loss. In this case, just the tears and the cracks.
I'd liken it more to the mods that convert DirectX 8 operations to 9, so that old games can keep running. You'd have to go back to Jan van Eyck and the perfection of oil techniques for the last major advancement Paint had, and even before that, tempera was okay. Acrylics might be easier to clean up, but there has been no meaningful advancement in paint, brushes, or canvases that would warrant recreating any of these artworks. For most of modern history, the only major limitation painters faced was their own skill. Video games impose severe limits that even the most skilled artists can't overcome. Countless games have lighting and assets that are nothing but praiseworthy, yet all of it is undercut by constant stuttering and performance issues. These are things that may be out of the artist's control. A whole different team may be responsible for those issues, or they may be inherent quirks of the engine the game is running in, or the graphics API it's using. Because video games depend upon unbelievably complex stacks of software developed and maintained by multinational corporations or non-profit consortiums in order to do their work. I've seen countless instances of developers roadblocked by driver issues, because often what they can achieve is dictated not by their own skill, but by Jensen Huang getting off his pile of AI money and fixing a bug. And if you're anyone other than a major studio, you may be waiting a long time for that fix. So if you wanted to improve that brush analogy, let's say you can't hold the brush directly but have to interface with it through the Brushworks API, which is riddled with bugs. Your strokes lag or hang. Even if the brush is correctly loaded, the paint won't flow, or suddenly flows too much. You may have complex details in mind but settle for crude shapes, knowing the brush would never render anything better. Your artistic skill has been defeated by tech issues at almost every turn. 6 years go by, and now Brushworks 4.7 is out. It still has a lot of limits, but the specific issues you faced before have been fixed.
Aha!
Now should you return to redo that painting. You could get into the weeds about whether this would be Lucas-style revisionism. I didn't say this was a good analogy, just a better one, because there is no direct comparison between video games and other forms of media. Other people brought up the fact that movies were once silent or black and white as proof that limitations have no bearing on whether something is art. But it's kind of lazy to draw that equivalence without considering how radically different the limits are. First and foremost, performance is a non-factor for films. Think of the worst movie you've seen. it was probably a perfectly consistent 24 FPS.
Hi, doggy.
You're my favorite customer.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
If not, something has gone wrong in a way that is almost unprecedented in modern filmmaking. If a brand new video game is veering between 10 and 50 FPS, it's Tuesday.
Down into the 40s already.
And performance was really, really bad as soon as that door opened.
Oh, it's such a shame.
It's absolutely hung up for a good minute.
Sorry, a minute.
And then it started dropping to about the low 10s, basically.
Unlike films, which tend to look less natural at higher rates, games demand the smoothest and most immersive presentation possible because you're inhabiting a character and living through them. You need to be able to perform an action and see the results instantaneously, or your link to the game is degraded and the illusion falls apart. The most extreme example of this is VR, where people get physically sick if the rates and resolutions aren't high enough to fool the eye. This has nothing to do with that, I just like it. That performance is largely dictated by whatever process nodes and architectures are available at the time. It is not an artistic consideration. Star Fox is a good demonstration of this. The artists made its untextured, low-poly graphics actually look striking in their own way. The soundtrack? Certifiably rad. The game design and creative choices all hold up, but the catastrophic frame rate and D-pad control make it actively hard to play. If you consider Star Fox to be art, is the frame rate part of it? Filmmakers can choose what rates they want arbitrarily. It's a deliberate decision. Did the developers get to choose this rate, or was it just the best the system could do? To get the SNES to render polygons, they had to resort to putting a second processor on the cartridge itself, and even then it barely worked. The experience of playing this is like listening to a song through radio interference, or watching a movie out of focus. My connection to the media is being damaged by some tech issue outside the realm of art. There are patches to improve this frame rate on emulators, and Nintendo 64 games are receiving PC ports that enable much higher frame rates and stability. A lot of people seemed excited when enhanced versions of Switch 1 games were announced, because resolution and frame rate increases are as close to objective improvements as you can get. If you take advantage of modern hardware like this, are you bastardizing a work of art? Or are you just running a computer program better? Because every game ultimately is a program, a massive collection of code and assets. There is a line between the creative aspects of a game and its banal tech foundations, where the art ends and the megahertz begin. Can you say with confidence where exactly that line is? Movies don't completely depend on APIs and processing power to exist. Even movies from a century ago can have a stunning amount of detail because they were simply recording the real world with a camera. In my review, I noted how stiff Silent Hill 2's facial animations look, and how much the remake was able to improve in that regard. This is a problem that video games are still trying to grapple with, badly, in the case of Nvidia's cutting-edge AI solution, and it's one that movies have never had. From the beginning, people looked like people because they were. The characters in Citizen Kane weren't blocky polygonal monstrosities. Color was limited for decades, but apart from a small subset of viewers, that doesn't make films harder to watch, and that limit has clear stylistic appeal. Filmmakers still choose to shoot in black and white today, and not strictly out of nostalgia. It can bring a sense of detachment, delineate time periods, censor violence, or emphasize lighting and contrast. There are low-poly throwback games, which could be compared to modern black and white films, but they rarely throw all the way back. They resemble retro games on the surface, but their frame rates, poly counts, controls, and camera systems all take advantage of modern hardware, engines, and APIs, because no one wants to play a 15 FPS game in the goddamn 2020s. The few games that simulate that performance are doing it artificially, with results that I don't find remotely nostalgic or appealing. Throwback games not only eschew authentic performance, but authentic controls, and for good reason. Not even a reunion of Rare developers could get people to tolerate old-style cameras again. The unspoken agreement between fans and creators seems to be give us the rose-tinted versions of 90s games, not the real thing. I had the chance to speak to the developers of Kero Quest 64, an upcoming love letter to early 3D platformers, about their approach to making a modern N64 game. Just to be clear, they did not ask me to promote this in any way. I asked them for input and they were generous enough to give me the motherlode.
As far as the engine goes, we're using Unity, which is modern engine, you know, like it has like anything you can expect from like a modern game. But what we had to do when we made Kero is that we had to turn all that shit away. Like we had to like remove everything basically, because we definitely wanted the game to feel as retro as it could, with some enhancement on top of that we could provide because we're using a modern architecture.
So the TLDR for me personally is that I think a picture of the game should feel more N64, but the game in motion shouldn't necessarily have to feel the same.
If you play Mario 64 nowadays, there's a lot of things that didn't age really well. Like you can jump, but you cannot turn after jumping. You can only like move left and right slightly. I wanted to fix that. I definitely wanted the controls to feel more modern. So in Mario 64, when you long jump, you're pretty much stuck at that speed going forward and you cannot turn. While in Kero, you can actually like slow it down and you can turn. You can turn mid-air during a long jump. I feel like while the retro graphics can appeal to nostalgic people, the movement, if I were to make the movement like Mario 64, that wouldn't have appealed to the large audience, you know? I wanted people to say, oh, this is an N64 game, but I also wanted people that never played those games to say, oh, this is interesting. Oh, it plays like a modern game. In the marketing of the game, I kind of wanted to go and say, hey, our game controls better than Mario 64. But then...
the Nintendo is gonna be...
yeah, no. But I wanted the game from the get-go to support 2 analog sticks. If you want to play with keyboard and mouse, you can. But I wanted for sure the base game, when you boot the game for the first time, to be supporting 2 sticks.
It seems you kind of have the D-pad camera system that's a little bit like the Mario 64 type.
Because most Mario 64 ROM hacks nowadays use something called parallel cam, and it's pretty useful if you design levels around it. So I wanted that for Kero as well.
I didn't want the parallel cam. Like, it was a huge debacle for a while with all 3 of us. And then I saw more and more people start to use that camera, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you're right, bro, dude. That was a good choice to make.
Was there anything, like, from the 64 that you knew you did not want to do, even if it was authentic?
That would be the lighting, because like I do really want to try and make the whole game vertex lit, which is challenging because if we have any light sources in a level and there's big faces, because the levels of course aren't going to be super detailed, you're going to get weird lighting issues because it's not smooth, it's per vertex. But still, even with per vertex lights, we can have more lights than an N64 would be able to have. We can have that sort of interpolated, old school, triangle shape looking lighting stuff going on, but we can have more of it.
Right now what would be holding it back is like some of the textures. N64 can take like sometimes 64x64. Most of the time in Kero I use like 128x128 just so it practically is still my 64 type N64 type textures, but like a little bit bigger so they don't repeat as much.
We still wanted things to look like an N64 game, so we had to put some kind of limitation, but those are not hard-coded. Like, if we ever need, like, over here, you can just take a 1,000 by 1,000 PNG, shove that in the game, and it just works.
It seemed like you have really long draw distances. Do you feel like that's one area where you were able to take advantage of modern engines and hardware? You're not limited by the levels of detail the N64 would have had?
Oh yeah. In Mario 64, the objects don't show up unless you're like really close to them.
There are some objects in SM64 like the stars and the red coins that are coded that you can see them from way further away than other objects. Yeah, Mario's like, what, 800 polygons?
That was a lot to load all at once, and they just basically made a LOD model for him, level of detail.
Mamma mia, I am a come in for my princess.
Over here in Kero, we don't really care about that because, as I said, like Kero's model can be run on calculator if we wanted to.
Now, is there like a max frame rate?
Internally, I limit the game to 60, but the game can be ran at any frame rate that your monitor can support. So basically, we use the delta time, and no matter the frame rate, the movement is going to be the same. It's not going to speed up, it's not going to slow down.
How does that impact how you do animations? Because
I don't really animate for any specific frame rate. I kind of just have like, you know, the animation curves, and those kind of just let you do smoothly something that can work at any frame rate. The coins are a pre-rendered two-dimensional sprite. We had at one point considered giving the players an option to enable 3D coins, like how some ROM hacks in Mario 64 had 3D coins, and they just looked so unnatural to me.
I assume you never considered doing like a 17 frames per second lock or anything like that.
No.
Nobody
No.
would want to play a game like that now, right?
Nobody wants to play that, and if somebody wants to play that, then shame on you. Like, why? I legit want to sit down with you and ask you why
Because
and
it's so
who
bad.
hurt you in the past.
Most low-poly indie games sneak modern design in under the hood this way, but there's been a recent spate of throwbacks that do simulate bad performance and warping. Most of these are horror titles intended to explicitly harken back to the PS1, and usually specific games like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Final Fantasy programmer Koji Sugimoto recently expressed his bewilderment that anyone would want to replicate the defects he and other developers hated at the time, going as far as calling PS1 graphics detestable. When the developers themselves clearly state that these limits were never part of the intended aesthetic and only a hindrance to it, it becomes much harder to separate nostalgia from the projects emulating those defects. Not that there's anything wrong with a little nostalgia, but for these visuals to be timeless art, there has to be more merit to them than that. There are legitimate non-nostalgia reasons to go low poly. For Minecraft, simple geometry makes the voxel-based world easier for players to understand. For Kero Quest 64, it seems like ease of development and familiarity with N64 assets were the main factors.
I did think of maybe going full modern, but the reality of it is that it's way harder, and I needed to find somebody that I know I could trust, so that's why I approached BroDude.
Yeah, I practically make these levels like I still make my 64 levels. I've been making my 64 mods since 2012, so I got a long history in like making levels for SM64. It's just like my art style.
If you did fully modern graphics, would you change the mechanics and the controls and the general gameplay too? Or would you want something that still kind of plays like Kero Quest does?
I think the gameplay loop of Kero Quest is great. So personally, I would say just keep that going.
It's just gonna be better Kero Quest with better graphics, I guess.
I've seen like a lot of horror games that are doing like 20 FPS, the wobbly polygons.
Yeah, so the reason for that is because they want to convince you that that was an old game that was like a lost haunted copy, whereas that's not what we're doing.
They're trying to make you uneasy by showing you old graphics that you're not really used to and that like are distorted, so you think there's something in the fog while there isn't.
This take on low-poly horror reminds me of The Mist, which Frank Darabont wanted to shoot in black and white to channel 50s B-movies. How much of this style is meaningful and how much of it is nostalgia mining is another knot to untangle, and will vary from game to game. I consider visual effects to be a bigger limitation on films than black and white was, but bad results were often more a matter of bad decision-making than bad tech. There were always ways to shoot around a problem. There were no hard limits. As with a painting, what the artists could achieve was mostly limited by their own imagination and skill. And the budget. There are shots in movies older than anyone watching this video right now that still baffle viewers. Shots that shouldn't have been possible but somehow were. A film being decades old doesn't necessarily mean it has bad effects, bad detail, or bad anything. And newer technology doesn't make films better. In fact, there are countless examples of new tech making them substantially worse. Few people would argue that high-powered computers improved the prequels to Star Wars or The Thing. And it turns out that photorealistic lion rendering isn't worth shit compared to hand animation. Many directors avoid using CGI because it so often looks fake compared to practical effects. Computer technology is a useful tool, but nothing about it is inherently better. Sometimes puppets or animatronics are still the best choice. The greatest looking movies tend to mix both according to the scene.
Where does the poo-poo come from, Daddy?
Revisiting old movies with modern effects has been a proven recipe for disaster, and as far as I'm aware, there's no fan interest in further special editions, even when the original effects clearly show their age. If anyone wants to remake Jurassic Park, they can fuck right off. That's not the case for programs that have always been run entirely on a computer. 16 gigabytes is definitively better than 4 megabytes. 60 FPS is better than 10. A more stable, smoother running program is plainly an improvement, and often a highly demanded one. The most acclaimed games from the most brilliant developers of the 5th generation practically all run like garbage. Final Fantasy VII dips as low as 15 FPS. It took all the devs had just to put Link on a horse without the N64 exploding. Because no matter how talented the teams were or how much they optimized, they were bound by hardware limits. Pixel fill rates, RAM capacity, clock speeds, thermals, these things are like laws of physics that can't be broken. The 4th generation also suffered these limits, but has aged like wine overall. Developers had perfected the formulas they started on 8-bit systems, and the hardware had grown to accommodate their visions. You didn't have to repeat the same 5 rooms over and over to make a world anymore. Battery saving was standard. A lot of games on the SNES were quasi-remakes of their NES progenitors, and they're some of the most acclaimed games of all time. 16-bit pixel art and audio generally seem to have strong appeal, even among players that did not grow up with those graphics, and more retro throwback games emulate this period than any other. Apart from some controversy over scan lines and aspect ratios, these games don't need changes to look great and play well today. In fact, attempts at remaking them tend to get cold receptions. Secret of Mana was a pitiful downgrade to the audio-visual experience of the original. Trials of Mana fared much better due to gameplay tweaks, but aesthetically it was a side grade at best. If you count Cave Story as retro, its remake was fugly with a capital UGG. Fans seem to favor the unofficial pixel remake of Metroid 2 to Nintendo's more advanced, yet uglier 3D version. The most dated SNES games tend to be the ones faking 3D through Mode 7. Apart from those, the 16-bit era was a rare golden age that withstood the test of time exceptionally well, and new tech has been able to add very little to it. The following generation was abnormally rough in spite of newer and better hardware, with the dust not having settled on the standards of 3D development yet, and so often what developers wanted to do was impossible or barely achievable on the hardware. You can argue that the way artists work around limitations becomes part of the art itself, but some of the workarounds just made the games age even more poorly. Pre-rendered backgrounds skirted polygon limits, but led to blotchy 240p visuals that clash with 3D models on modern displays. Scanline filters can help, but in my experience they're fiddly to set up and work inconsistently. Some people swear by using a CRT to play these games as originally designed, but relying on fading antiques is not a long-term solution.
This is the best CRT gaming setup you can have. This used to be rated for 125 nits of peak luminance. It has aged down to a mere 69.
So now it's all gross because the blue phosphors have probably worn out a little bit more?
Movies were initially only made for projection, but direct-to-negative scans look better and more detailed than release prints ever did in theaters, and no reasonable person would suggest that every home should instead project 35mm reels for accuracy. Some people drew parallels between 4K movie transfers and game remakes, as if to say that all media gets the same type of remastering that games do over time. This is also not true. The real gaming equivalent of a 4K disc is probably this: rendering the same source content at 4K in an emulator. Film was always 4K, HDR, and wide gamut. At least the raw information was there on the celluloid the day color grading was finished decades ago. It was our display tech, not the art itself, that needed upgrading. CRTs designed for over-the-air signals couldn't possibly display the full range of details on the film. Now that our displays can, a new 4K transfer yields what was there all along. Yes, there's labor needed to repair fading and damage, but it's like restoring a painting. In the majority of cases, this is straightforward and uncontroversial work.
The whole point of this process is to not let the viewer know that we were here.
Removing a scratch is not the same thing as fabricating new textures, lighting systems, and gameplay mechanics that never existed before. Disputes over color timing are common, but usually constrained to the realm of nitpicking. Behold, Jurassic Park's unforgivable magenta tint. It's typically only when a remaster deliberately engages in revisionism, a la Mr. Cameron letting Skynet author his 4Ks, that real creative changes get introduced. And even in the worst case scenarios, the movies still look about how they should. Some people couldn't even notice the AI artifacts in Cameron's movies. I'm not saying these issues aren't important, but there's only so much you can do to fuck up a shot, and the worst examples don't compare to the catastrophically broken effects found in bad game releases. The range of creative freedom and risk between these formats isn't even close. If you want a better parallel between game and movie remasters, Kill Bill might offer one. It was shot on film but finished as a 2K digital master, as were a lot of movies in the 2000s. That old Cinema Master has wider dynamics than Blu-ray can show, but there's no resolution gain and it suffers odd motion problems. For a true 4K release, the film elements would have to be rescanned and all the post-production work would have to be redone, which would not be a trivial job. That level of restoration would be slightly more comparable to a game remaster, because it would require creative work to be redone. But this is generally infeasible, and 2K masters almost always get cheaply upscaled to 4K instead. Animated movies are of course created entirely on computers, but they aren't bound by the need for immediate rendering. They can take their time to generate high-quality frames. Toy Story was rendered at a rate of 30 seconds per day, with 4 hours spent on each individual frame. To put that into perspective, here's the entirety of Titanic set against one frame of Woody. And this is how long a 60 FPS video game has to render a frame in real time. Computer graphics are far more advanced now, but there's no pressing need to recreate these movies, because they were never compromised to the extent games are. This is Tin Toy from 1988. I could show it beside a game from 1998 and there would still be no comparison, even when pre-rendering was used. The most these films tend to get is a re-rendering for 3D or HD resolutions, but many of them were HD to begin with, and getting the old project files to work on current machines is nearly impossible, so these often just get cheaply upscaled to 4K too. None of this is equivalent to a game remake or even remaster, and again there's the gameplay element. Movies are not interactive.
But what if when we do jump into the future,
well,
there is something to be afraid of?
Almost no movies are interactive.
What do you think of this boner I got?
Everything you experience on a game system, whether it's action, a puzzle, or a story, is done almost exclusively through your thumbs. Think about how weird that is for a second. It's an extreme limitation, so platform holders have worked to maximize the efficiency of that connection. The way we control games has changed radically over the years, sometimes as a result of new sensors and inputs being developed, but sometimes as a result of basic problem solving. Someone had to be the first to realize that index fingers could also push buttons. We didn't have 3D controls when 3D games launched. It took gamepads 2 years to catch up. I mentioned the D-pad as a factor making Star Fox feel dated. Was digital aim an artistic choice, or were the devs forced to conform to whatever piece of plastic the system shipped with? You can argue about whether games are art, but hardware isn't. It's a consumer electronic product, and it sets the limits of the platform. Developers rarely have a choice about how you'll physically interact with their program, only about which of the buttons they map to which actions. Analog control is clearly better for piloting and shooting, because you can move in 360 degrees and modulate speed. If you could patch it into Star Fox, would you be bastardizing the game, or just using a more appropriate input for its gameplay? A similar question came up when the Wii Remote made aiming faster than a stick. Do better controls ruin the experience if the game wasn't designed around them? It can certainly unbalance the difficulty, but outside of that, assuming the balance isn't broken, is there a fundamental objection to make over using a different input than the one developers designed for? And is it even possible to preserve the original inputs when the consumer electronic products we play with keep changing over time? In comparison, the way we physically watch movies hasn't changed much at all. Whether it was a projector or flat screen, streaming or disc, 2D or 3D, our method of engagement has always been sitting and staring.
What do you think of this boner I got?
For all of these reasons, video game remakes are unique. People clamor for them to bring their favorite games forward. From 2011 to 15, the Zelda staff couldn't do a single interview without being pestered for Majora's Mask 3D. For 13 years, Capcom was begged to remake Resident Evil 2 until finally they do it. Hype and anticipation build for decades.
Please note that we have seen is merely a sample, and we currently have no plans on releasing a remake of Final Fantasy VII.
With reveals getting orgasmic responses from the community. When was the last time you saw this happen for a movie?
I saw a big hairy man today.
Someone's out there.
We have to leave. Now! Movie remakes tend to faceplant with both fans and critics because good movies don't need remakes. There is nothing wrong with RoboCop or The Crow. Redoing the same film with newer technology is almost invariably a pointless endeavor. The few remakes that are well regarded tend to be major stylistic departures that only share basic plot points with the originals. John Carpenter's The Thing and Suspiria are examples of this. They're great movies, but remakes weren't necessary. They weren't made to fix a problem. The Thing isn't even a remake, but a completely different adaptation of the novella. The old Thing didn't even replicate people, which is kind of the whole thing. There can be a lot of merit to direct remakes of video games. Sometimes a frame rate or resolution bump isn't enough. The old visuals get broken in HD. You see things you weren't supposed to see, and the things you were supposed to see don't look how they were supposed to. Ocarina of Time is hard to revisit through no fault of its own. The game design and creative choices hold up well. The primitive N64 rendering is the barrier. The 3DS version doesn't reinvent the wheel or reimagine the game as something new. It improves the frame rate, polycounts, and controls while letting the original design mostly stand, serving as a much better entry point for new players. Resident Evil is similar, offering a massive tech upgrade just 6 years after the original. Even something as small as characters moving their feet like real humans improves the immersion. It innovates a fair amount at the same time, adding new areas and mechanics, but it always plays by the old rules and doesn't screw with the formula. The looks of these games are different, and upgraded fidelity comes with inevitable style changes that could subjectively be considered downgrades. Ocarina of Time 3D doesn't get everything right, though I consider it much better in aggregate. Dario's upcoming RT mod offers an alternative that literally shows the original assets in a new light, which some might prefer, though it can't help with pre-rendered areas much. Mario All-Stars is often said to be worse, even if the 16-bit visuals are appealing on their own terms. The more generic style of Mario 3 in particular is a letdown. There have certainly been a lot of remasters with broken effects and fumbled gameplay, often as a result of entirely different teams at different companies trying to force old games into modern engines, sometimes without even having properly preserved source code. Other remakes just flat out get it wrong, made by developers that didn't understand the game, didn't care, or didn't have the resources to do the job well. Ideally, the original staff would handle these projects, but that's often not possible after decades have passed. Even if the original studio remakes a game, its dev turnover rate may be near 100%. This isn't as big a problem as a different director or painter remaking a work of art. Games are split between hundreds of individuals, and a lot of assets are sourced from stock libraries anyway. Not having the same guy that turned a photo of wood into a texture 30 years ago isn't likely to break the remake. A new team can also reuse the original code to avoid making gameplay changes. With Remake and Ocarina of Time 3D, the styles are at least faithful to the original intent, and the core experience is intact. If you play either of these remakes, you've played the games. The originals deserve to exist alongside them, but I would only recommend playing those out of curiosity, because the remakes do what they're supposed to do. They retain the same design but take advantage of better hardware to deliver a polished final draft. This is mostly what I consider remakes to be for, giving the most compromised early 3D games a second chance with good rendering. Some people want remakes to go further and reimagine all of the creative choices. Camera systems, control schemes, level designs, everything nuked from orbit. This is again a matter of where you place that line that separates the artistic substance from the outdated tech elements. But if you feel this way, you're basically admitting that games aren't art, that the creative decisions are arbitrary, disposable, and replaceable. The producer of the Wii's GoldenEye remake said the original was too dated to be worth playing. His remake became a Call of Duty clone, with none of the original levels or design. It was fine. Above average even. But it wasn't GoldenEye, and hardly anyone seems to remember it. That's the problem with discarding the original game. What you replace it with isn't guaranteed to be as interesting as gameplay that shaped the industry. Legendary games are few and far between. The idea that your team is going to fart out something better just because you have more RAM is asinine. Most of these games were revolutionary at the time. A remake that safely conforms to every current standard of its genre is anything but. Had Nintendo taken this approach and reimagined Ocarina of Time, we probably would have ended up with something like Twilight Princess, another fine game that wasn't as interesting or important as its predecessor. The main criticism of Snake Eater Delta has been that it's too faithful. It didn't rebuild the levels as a seamless open world, but that one change would have proven a slippery slope. It would have meant reworking the enemy behaviors, draw distances, alert system, checkpoints, pacing, and general balance, all of which would carry major risk. The Twin Snakes tried to modernize by adding the sequel's first-person aiming and stealth mechanics, and they infamously derailed the original game design. If Konami had fully upgraded Snake Eater to Phantom Pain mechanics, maybe people would similarly be complaining that it ruined the game. While they earned widespread acclaim, the remakes of RE2 and especially 3 fall into this modernized reimagining category. Capcom apparently considers the originals trash. GOG had to twist their arm to make re-releases happen because Capcom saw no point in their continued existence.
They didn't really see the value in bringing back the classical versions, the vanilla ones. It took a lot of convincing that, hey guys, there is an audience that has a lot of memories about those games, right? So it doesn't matter if the game was remade or not.
It's a disappointing stance given the huge differences in content and style between versions. I don't mean to keep harping on this forever, but RE2 is the poster child for the current remake craze. In the same way The Force Awakens drove a nostalgia surge in movies.
Han Solo.
Han Solo.
Millennium Falcon. Kessel Run.
Death Star. Trash compactor.
So it warrants an extra look. In the originals, you weren't the protagonist. You didn't see what they saw or hear what they heard. Your perspective was the camera, some kind of remote observer of the action. People cringe when games are called cinematic, but in this case it's literally true. The developers chose where to place the viewer the same way cinematographers do. I've gone over the appeal of those placements numerous times, whether they built tension, highlighted objects, or made environments more intimidating. The games were filled with strong music to further drive those same emotions. The team decided how they wanted you to feel and used every creative tool they had to maximize that feeling. The 240p renders are clearly dated, but the creative decisions hold up. The camera placements and soundtracks still have amazing synergy. Whenever I see the letters RPD, I hear that score in my head, like a Pavlovian response. In the initial years of remake begging, fans wanted a GameCube treatment that kept all of that. But for the majority of players today, fixed cameras are one of those dated elements, a tech limit that should be considered obsolete. There's no ambiguity over perspective in the remake. You are the protagonist. It's not first person, but you see what they see and hear what they hear. The music has even been stripped out to emphasize binaural sound. Instead of crafting a specific mood and steeping you in it, Capcom's focus is on immediacy and realism. They're not putting their thumb on the scale and telling you how to feel. They've made the scenario as believable as they can and left you to react however you want. The result is a game that can be more intensely frightening because it feels more like this is happening to you, that you really are in this setting and experiencing these things firsthand. But once you get a handle on the enemies, that fear dissolves and the game flatlines.
Oh no.
The RPD becomes an empty, dull building, one I've never felt much urge to revisit. The bungled B scenarios and samey campaigns also don't help replay value. That brings up another issue. Games are more expensive to make now.
We're at the point where games are not cost effective to make anymore. The sales are not increasing as much as the costs are. Even a mobile game, a high quality mobile game, is going to cost 9 digits to make.
You might not be able to deliver all of the original content in a single $70 package. It took Final Fantasy VII 3 full budget releases spanning more than a decade. Recording 4 versions of every scene just isn't practical with current production standards. Maybe they could have done it with DLC, but that ship has sailed. The remake is still good and I understand why people prefer it, but what you can't disagree on is that there are fundamental changes to the controls and presentation that render this a completely different game. If you've only played the remake, I don't think you've played Resident Evil 2, and that goes double for 3, which didn't seem bothered to remake anything at all. So if you still have to go back to the original systems to experience the original game design, what was the point of these remakes? That's not an insult to their quality, but a genuine question. If what you come back with is a different game, why even do a remake versus a new title? Obviously, there's massive financial appeal to nostalgia, but faithful remasters aren't always lucrative.
We just pitched one game, and he said, okay, so this sells, say, 100,000 units at $6 each. Why would we bother? Come back to me when you can do 100 games, all with modern controls and modern enhancements and remastered, and then we'll have a discussion.
Reimaginings tailored for modern players have much higher potential, enough that Capcom isn't stopping the remake train anytime soon. Seeing their success, other companies have followed suit. In this regard, game remakes are becoming more like movie remakes. For fans, there is a novelty to playing an alternate version of a classic game, as a way of breathing new life into an experience they've gotten bored of. I can't deny that I enjoyed Capcom's reimaginings a lot, even if I prefer the originals in every single case. Some argue that it's doing faithful remakes that's pointless, because we already have the originals, and this is a chance to get something new. I can agree with this in cases where the original still holds up. Taking the gameplay in a new direction paid off for Trials of Mana, since the old visuals are basically perfect. The same game just with polygons would have been boring. But if a game doesn't need a remake, you can just make a new game. Capcom essentially did this with RE7. It was their attempt at recapturing the spirit of RE1, but in a modern form. And while it's not my favorite in the series, it is one of the most interesting for the risks it took. Risks that might not have been allowed within the context of a remake. Village did the same thing for RE4. It cloned the basic structure, with the progression from a European village to a castle and finally an industrial setting, even bringing back a merchant. When they directly remade RE4, it just wasn't as interesting to me, even if I recognize it as a better playing game than Village. We already had a great looking and playing RE4. We didn't have something quite like Village yet. Zero Mission steps into this a small amount. Because Super already boosted the original idea to 16-bit standards, the remake occasionally feels redundant. It mostly copied Super's versions of the bosses rather than reworking the originals. Super included what looked like the old Kraid, but the fight ended suspiciously fast. Players were then hit with the reveal of Kraid's massive new scale, much as my neighbors were hit with the reveal of my massive new scale recently. If you start with Zero Mission instead, the gag is broken and the small Kraid doesn't make sense anymore. Is that a big problem? No. Zero Mission is still by far the better way to experience Metroid 1. But it demonstrates how easy it is to break things when you start unplugging and replacing bits of game design all over, and why it may be better to drop the remake baggage and start anew if you want a new experience. Final Fantasy VII strikes an interesting balance by posing as a remake, but revealing itself to actually be a sequel as it unfolds, or some such bullshit. It falls into the modernized reimagining category, but with a narrative that cleverly justifies the liberties it takes. The devs embraced and leaned into the fact that it doesn't replace the original. Some begging for remakes don't care about aesthetics, moods, or creative choices at all. They just don't want to go back to old controls, period. They don't care what changes because the old game is a non-starter to them anyway. Developers react to one another's work and iterate on it, raising the standards for controls game by game. Zelda used a mix of third and first-person cameras to make aiming work in 3D. Resident Evil 4 evolved that concept by stopping the first-person zoom at the shoulder, making the transition less jarring and keeping your character on screen. Games like The Last of Us polished and streamlined the controls from there. No one wants to go backward in that chain of evolution, and I can relate to this. I thought the modern cameras in Silent Hill 2 made the experience much smoother, even if I recognized that some of the atmosphere was lost. If Shadows of the Empire got remade, I'd 100% want it to be over the shoulder, rather than the single-stick bullshit they were doing back then. But that chain of evolution never stops. RE4 was the game that killed fixed-camera Resident Evil, but now 4 itself is considered an archaic tank control game. I often see posts from people who can't tolerate its lack of free cameras or movement while aiming. Games like The Last of Us made RE4's scheme obsolete, but even that title hasn't escaped the passage of time unscathed. When its own remake was announced, I saw commenters hoping animations and physics would be brought up to the level of Part 2, since that title made the first game mechanically obsolete. Generational controller changes aren't as radical as in the past, but there will probably never be a safe, timeless control scheme for a remake to land on. If new controls are going to age into obsolescence anyway, I think there's an argument to let the games remain as they originally were, with a few tweaks, and not fully bastardize them in pursuit of short-lived modernization that will only end up needing modernization again in a few years. You could argue that it's the same for graphics. They always move forward too, so what's the point of overhauling anything? Ocarina of Time 3D and Remake have both aged to the point where a second round of remakes could be justified. But there's undeniably a point of diminishing returns where graphics stop mattering. We are over 5 years into this console cycle, yet I still often see PS4 titles being floated as the pinnacle of graphics. That would have been unthinkable in previous generations. Chip manufacturing has gotten more expensive and isn't providing the gains it used to. AMD adopted a multi-chip approach because newer processors stopped benefiting some components.
The analog I/O stuff is just as good in 6nm as it is in 5. It's the logic that really needs the advanced node.
Nvidia is giving up on traditional rendering advances and diving headfirst into AI. New rendering techniques like ray tracing can make games look worse depending on the scene, and when they do improve things, the performance hit is arguably not worth it. It really depends on the game. It can be hard to see the $700 improvements the PlayStation 5 Pro makes in direct comparisons. The need for that system to justify itself with fancy visuals has led to worse performance than base PS5 in some titles. Remakes suffer a similar problem. The need to chase cutting-edge graphics has saddled many with performance issues of their own, which probably can't be fixed without another generational leap in hardware. It's fair to ask if remakes are worth doing at all when they still end up with god-awful performance in spite of decades of advancement. PC is the only platform that offers immunity to this. Evolving hardware eventually fixes performance through brute force, though even there the tech is stagnating. I don't think games need constant remaking to keep up with changing visual standards. There's a minimum threshold, somewhere between PS2 and PS3, that I can settle for. It would be nice to have a new 4K Ocarina of Time, but if a 3DS emulator or the RT mod is the best we ever get, I can live with that. The assets and lighting in Remake are technically dated, but the only problem is the 480p cap on backgrounds. Zero was able to use new HD renders and its graphics are completely satisfying, even if old-fashioned at a tech level. I felt the same about RE4 using the HD project. It looks old and great at the same time. Maybe you feel the same way about controls. Maybe there's a minimum threshold you will find adequate even as modern schemes keep improving. Maybe you don't mind if Remake 2 ages a bit mechanically, as long as it's not tank controlled. I've still barely scratched the surface of a lot of topics, like the role fans have in restoring games versus commercial studio products, or the impossibility of remaking the context a game released in. You could remake Mario 64 today, but you could never recapture how mind-blowing it was in 1996. Video games literally gained a new dimension, and that can only happen once. Then there are remakes people want specifically because the original was not great. Zero and Code Veronica are mostly interesting for this reason, since there's a chance to avoid the mistakes that soured fans on the originals. But what makes a game good or bad is obviously subjective. Code Veronica did get great contemporary reviews after all. The best practice is for developers to retain the original systems alongside the new ones whenever possible. Modders have demonstrated that Majora's Mask 3D did not have to be polarizing. Options allowed the game to be customized to suit anyone's tastes. And if options aren't feasible, at least try to do a decent port of the original so that a new generation of systems can run it. The point is that remakes are incredibly complicated even if you don't believe that video games are art, and if you do, it's even muddier. If publishers are going to remain as committed to remakes as they appear to be, we should really figure out what the hell they're for and why we're asking for them, because no one seems to agree on what these things are supposed to do. I've reviewed a lot of them at this point, and typically see extremely charged reactions going both directions. If I praise the original, I'm blinded by nostalgia. If I praise the remake, I have a bad take and don't understand the original. Grabbing pitchforks and shouting down anything you disagree with, fighting to make sure only your opinion rises to the top, doesn't do any good for anyone. The nuance is what makes remakes interesting. Every take on remakes is valid, whether you like the old stuff or the new stuff. You're allowed to want what you want. I just want you to think more about why you want what you want. Developers need healthy conversations to happen to help divine the right direction to take their projects. When fans are loud enough, they do seem to listen. So, in conclusion, Capcom should fucking remake Dino Crisis. I want bigger dinos, better dinos, with laser roars, ray-traced roars, half-traced roars. Hi there. If you made it to the end, thank you. I know it's not easy to find an hour of time. And if you're typing a comment accusing me of using AI, no, you idiot. No one trained an AI to sound like it has bronchitis and depression. It took 23 hours of narration over the course of 6 months to make this video. Why so much? Because most of it turns out like this. I don't want to harp on this. And But once you get a who the fuck for? Who the fuck for? Who the fuck for? But that ship has sailed. But it wasn't GoldenEye. It mostly copied Supers in the initial years of remake begging, like risks that might not have aha. Ooh, eek. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hurry up, idiot! Hurry up! Through brute. Why did I write that? Through brute force. Through brute. Considered an archaic tank control game. I'm bad at word, so by all means, roast my robotic delivery. But give me the credit for wading through the shit to get the job done, while you sit there on your lazy asses suckling from my content teats. How would you like it